When I was younger, a common activity that I used to pass away the hours was making a house of cards. You know, you can sit there for hours just making or trying to put things together and assemble these houses of cards. Maybe this would be a good activity for many of us in lockdown right now as we try to assemble different things and see what happens, right? In fact, maybe you could go on our Facebook page and we can have a competition of who can build the biggest house of cards right now. Of course, my son made one recently, but I think this is cheating, isn't it, when you use glue? You got to do the real thing. It doesn't work otherwise. You know, we're in this series in the book of the Old Testament called Ecclesiastes. And we've seen so far how the quester, as we've come to call him, is trying to make sense out of life. I think it's what many of us are trying to do right now. And I think if the quester was writing the book now, he might well use a house of cards to describe much of what he sees in life. So far, his assessment is that all of life has this havel. It's this Hebrew word to describe how fragile, how transient, how temporary life is. Of course, the image he uses is mist or smoke. You know, you see something arising and the smoke dissipates through the fingers. It's elusive. And we try to grab hold of it. We try to grab this meaning. We try to find substance in life, and it just seems to dissipate within our fingers. So last week he turned his attention to wisdom, and we saw the limitations of wisdom. Today, in chapter 2, we turn our attention to the pursuit of happiness. Listen to what he says. I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look at the good things in life. One of my favorite books is this one right here, The Question of God. The author, Ahmed Nikolai, is the psychiatrist who teaches at Harvard Medical School, so a pretty bright guy. And his course became so popular, it was put into this book. At the beginning of the book, he talks about how he asks these Harvard students if people around them are happy, and invariably they all say, well, no, they're not happy. And he says it's really interesting because these Harvard students, they seem to possess everything. They've got youth, they've got health, they've got intelligence, abundant food, clothes, a comfortable place to live, education, promising future, and yet they're unhappy. They're on the search for fame, for fortune, and some of them will get it, but he says actually they're still going to be unhappy. And this is what the quester finds in his own pursuit of happiness when he tries to do it through pleasure. So I find chapter 2 here incredibly helpful as we think of the quester's pursuit. And I wonder if we can think about almost like rooms in our house of cards. There's 4 rooms that he goes to in his pursuit here in chapter 2. First of all, he guides us to, I guess, the outdoor deck. Listen to what he says. I said, laughter is silly. I mean, what good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in the world. You know, I picture the quester out there on this outdoor deck, having this grand party with his friends, and they're having a grand old time. There's laughter, there's some pranks, there's jokes, there's tears streaming down their cheeks in laughter. And of course, he has access to a grand cellar as well. He's a wine connoisseur, speaks that sophisticated language that wine connoisseurs all speak. And then he adds to that, I hired wonderful singers, both men and women. This is like Spotify, except that this is actually the choir or band right there whenever he needs it, right there in his outdoor deck. From the deck, you kind of move down the marble steps and you come to the next part, the garden. And this is the best garden east of Eden. He says, I undertook great projects, these beautiful architectural feats. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees, with the best, I guess, innovation for that irrigation. This would be in the house and garden magazines of today, right? He then goes on to talk about the large human resource base to get all these projects done. More staff than anybody else, I guess he could gloat, showing off his importance. And how could he afford all this? Well, he takes us to another room in his house of cards, I guess, the study. He says, I amass silver and gold for myself, the treasure of kings and provinces. He opens up the financial accounts and we see all his assets aren't tied to fixed assets. There's also these liquid assets where he actually has the cash, the gold to buy anything and everything that he ever desires. And then he moves to another room, the bedroom. He says, I had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. And writing is this like Solomon-like character. We know Solomon has 700 wives and 300 concubines. It's an absurd scene, right? And realizing other people are listening this today, I'll kind of leave it right there. And the quester adds, I was far wealthier than all the predecessors in Jerusalem. I did not restrain myself from getting whatever I wanted. I did not deny myself anything that would bring me pleasure. I mean, he threw himself into this pursuit of pleasure. But listen to his final assessment. And yet when I reflected on everything I had accomplished and on all the effort I had expended to accomplish it, I concluded all these achievements, all these positions are ultimately Havel. It's like chasing the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. It's all like a house of cards. It's temporary, fragile, it's transient. And even though we haven't done everything that the quester has experienced in life, I think we've experienced enough of life to realize it's a pretty good assessment of a pursuit of pleasure, trying to find happiness. You know, we order that chocolate explosion, as it might be called, at that famed restaurant, and it's good, but you kind of finish it and you go, well, it's over. Is that all? Or you go on that trip, or maybe past tense, you went on that trip when the borders were open, and you come back and you're like, well, it's finished. Or you enjoy that experience that somebody promised and the marketing was so wonderful about it, but if we're honest, we kind of go, really? I mean, is that it? Is that what everybody's talking about? Same's true of money. You know, we can have millions of dollars and we can say millions of dollars won't buy happiness, and well, I haven't actually experienced that because I don't have millions of dollars, but we hear of people that have. Listen to this, actor Jim Carrey. He says, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they could see this isn't the answer. I mean, that's quite a profound, wise thing to say to us. I think politicians like the US President, Benjamin Franklin, who ironically has his picture on the $100 US bill, but he said this, money has never made man happy, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more of it one has, the more one wants. And I think even with the limited resources you might have, we feel the same thing, don't we? Or consider the words of singer Paul McCartney from the Beatles. He's saying, I don't care too much for money. Money can't buy me love. Some of you might be humming it away right now. And when interviewed about these words, Paul McCartney explained, you know, material possessions, I mean, they're all very well, but they won't buy me what I really want. You see, it's like the quester is saying to you and me, you know, what thing in our lives are we looking to in order to gain happiness? And then it's like he looks us right in the eye and says, will that thing satisfy? You know, you can throw yourself into it and, you know, go for it, you know, live your life, but Monday always comes. Yeah, you might enjoy that party on the weekend. You might throw yourself into work, but is it really worth all that anxiety and the stress? And again, realizing Monday comes and the party all seems to be over. And he concludes to repeat it again. All these achievements, all these positions are ultimately Havel. It's like chasing the wind. So what do we do with this? Well, what I've found is that people seem to do this either-or aspect of life. Either because we can't make sense of life, we just like mope around and we do nothing and we're just depressed. Or there's the starry-eyed optimist seeking to follow their heart, seeking to believe that God will just like fulfill all these dreams, everything will work out in life. And the quester says, actually, let's not do this either-or scenario. He says, you're actually looking at things the wrong way. You believe that, you know, if I could just remove the disruptions, if I could just remove the disappointments, you know, those lockdowns in life, then everything would go well in my life. Then I can actually enjoy things. But he said, well, what if you're actually not seeing it correctly? What if the way to actually enjoy things is realizing that disruptions and lockdowns and disappointments are part and parcel of life? Then you can actually find happiness. And you kind of sit back from this and you go, what? I mean, how does this work? But at the end of the chapter, he writes, I realize that these pleasures are from the hand of God. For who can eat and enjoy anything apart from him? God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. And he says this like 7 times throughout the book, and some of the bleakest moments throughout this monologue. He talks about enjoying the gift of God. For instance, I love the way he does this over in chapter 9. He says, go eat your food with joy, drink your wine with a happy heart, let your clothes always be white. In other words, don't look like you're heading off to a funeral, put some color on. Do not spare precious ointment on your head, put some product in your hair. Look like you're happy. He says, enjoy life with your beloved wife during the days of your fleeting life that God has given you on earth in all your fleeting days. In other words, enjoy it and look like you're enjoying it. If I had to summarize, I guess, the big idea of what's going on here, I would say, enjoy the moment in front of you, because there's only one thing you can control, and that's your attitude towards this present moment. There's 3 implications that come through in this big idea. Let me unpack them with you. First is this. Nothing in life is perfect, and so expect moments of disappointment and disruption. I mean, things don't always go as we planned them, so don't expect them to. I realize things don't always get assembled in the way that the manual says. And I'm not just talking about the kit set furniture you might have. I'm talking about the unwritten manuals, the unwritten expectations we bring to relationships or to our workplace or just to our health, to society in general. And it's like when life doesn't work according to that unwritten manual or according to those unwritten expectations, we face actually the disruptions and the chevel, the disappointments, the lockdowns. Well, then it can kind of just like sideswipe us in life. And the Quester says, actually, the first step to enjoying life is to realize that disappointments and disruptions are part and parcel of life in this broken world. You see, friends, this is the message of the gospel. It says this world is beautiful, but it's also broken. And it began right back in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve, they turned their back on God, and sin and selfishness and pride entered into life on this planet. And so now we shouldn't expect this to be heaven on earth. We live in a world compromised by all of these wrong things. And so when we think for a moment that we can find the ultimate shalom, the ultimate heaven right here in these 70 or 90 or whatever so many years of our life, we're going to be disappointed. And yes, there will be moments of beauty and wonder, but realize there's also going to be moments of disruption, unavoidable adversity. And so lower your expectations of what to expect. To help me do this over the last couple of weeks, I've been putting together a list of things I can control and the list of things I can't control. I'd encourage you to do the same thing this week. And what I'm finding is that that list of the things I can't control is pretty big. I can't control the weather. I can't control the length of my life. I can't control the length of this lockdown. I can't control what somebody thinks of me. I can't control how much food is or isn't in the supermarket. I can't control what mood my kids are in. It's all outside of my control. And what I'm learning is when I release these control areas of the things I can't largely control, and I concentrate on the one thing I can control, which is my attitude in this present moment, I'm actually able to enjoy the moment that's right in front of me. See, if you don't grasp this in your relationship, you might think that the person you've just met is going to be the best friend or the best spouse for you, and that it's going to be sheer heaven. And then when you start to see the flaws in that person, you can be sideswiped and disappointed and devastated. So what do? Well, some people think the answer is, well, you swap out that person, that friendship, that relationship for someone else. But of course, it's just more chevel. It just goes through this cycle of all this futility. And what we do with people, we do with stuff. We change one gadget for another, one house for another, one car for another, because we think that's the answer. We swap out this job for another job or whatever it might be, always assuming that if we just change our circumstances and try to control these things, we can somehow control the frustration. It doesn't work that way. The quest says, realize nothing in life is perfect. Expect moments of disappointment and disruption. There's a second implication here. To make sense of life, don't look at the creation, look at the creator. So if you look at a thing or you look at a person for your ultimate meaning and happiness, you're going to be disappointed. I wonder, what good things might you be expecting too much from right now? See, as we've heard before, we can have too much of a good thing. Biblically, when that happens, when we look at that thing or that person as the ultimate thing, we call it idolatry. That's what happens when we expect too much from some relationship or some activity or some job or whatever it might be beyond what it should be. And we look to that person or thing for our identity and meaning. And the problem is they can never live up to the hype and the expectations we place on them. You know, the hope of the gospel is that God ultimately will, and he is doing this right now. He's going to deal with the disappointments and the disruptions and the havel. Our hope has to be in God. Our identity and meaning has to be in him. Because it's only with God at the center of our life can life actually have any meaning or make any sense. You know, I mentioned that this book earlier called The Question of God, where this Harvard professor really stages a debate between the famous founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, and the famous author and Cambridge professor, C.S. Lewis. And of course, Freud was an atheist and C.S. Lewis was a Christian. And so it's a really interesting debate as they look at the pursuit of happiness. And it's really different. Freud, for instance, believed that happiness is rooted in pleasure. And he believed that people are not happy because they're not free to pursue outwardly what they desire inwardly. It's actually very similar to what the quester does here in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. And so how did this play out in Freud's real life? Well, in a letter that he wrote to his fiancée, he admitted that over like a 14-month period, he had experienced only 3 or 4 days at most of happiness. He found that the only thing that consistently lifted his spirits was actually taking cocaine. He felt that he was just overwhelmed with these feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, this pessimistic view of the future. And the author contrasts Freud's life, that was C.S. Lewis. And Lewis could understand, and he had experienced much of what Freud had experienced early on in his life, but that changed at 31 years of age when C.S. Lewis came to faith. He became a follower of Jesus. And his somber perspective of life was utterly transformed into this surprising joy. He even wrote a book about it, Surprised by Joy. Lewis asserts that the primary purpose of our lives, the very reason for our existence on this planet, is to establish a relationship with the very one who created us and placed us on this planet. And until that relationship is established, all of our attempts to find meaning and happiness, whether it's through a quest for recognition or money or power or the perfect relationship, the ideal friendship, they're all going to fall short. They're never going to live up to our expectations. There'll just be this like restlessness in us until we find God is at the very center of our existence. So I want to ask you today, do you know Jesus? Would you say Jesus is actually at the very center of your life? Perhaps you've never really chatted to him, or perhaps you would say, well, I'm in a relationship with him, but I wouldn't say he's quite at the center of where I find meaning and identity in life. See, Lewis would say if he's not, and the quester would say if he's not, well, actually, the meaning is going to be elusive to you. In a few minutes, I'd like to pray for you to help you find that if that's not where you're at right now, because we think that's a vital aspect to finding joy even amidst the disruptions. Because to make sense out of life, we need to look not to the creation, but to the Creator. There's one final implication. Enjoy the simple things as a gift from God. The question doesn't say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Instead, it's eat, drink, and be merry because, well, God has provided these things, and ultimately, He's going to deal with all the chaval and frustration, the sighing. And so enjoy the simple things as a beautiful gift from God. And every single passage where He talks about enjoying life, you'll notice it always involves two activities: eating and drinking. You know, it's this idea of dining. We looked at it earlier in some of our message series earlier this year. It's one of these common biblical themes from cover to cover that describe what we're made for, which is relationship. Because every time we sit around the table, we enjoy relationship. Every time we open up our mouth and we take some food, we're actually acknowledging our dependence on something and someone outside of our control. You know, I mean, did you produce those lovely muffins you've made during lockdown? Well, no, the ingredients came from Countdown or New World or Pack and Save, and they didn't make the ingredients, they sourced it from somewhere else too. You see, every time you open your mouth to eat, you're actually unintentionally acknowledging your fragility, your smallness, your dependence on larger forces outside of your control. And then when you eat, what happens afterwards? Well, you're satisfied, but it's not permanent. It's this kind of short, momentary state, isn't it? But these experiences, they can be like breadcrumbs in this trail leading us to a great feast where one day we're actually going to be around the table with Jesus, dining with Him in a place where, in this new heaven and new earth, where all things will be made right again without this chaval and frustration and pain and disruption of life. We're going to dine with Him. And so right now, even in those small moments, we enjoy the simplicity of them. And we don't make them the ultimate thing. Now, when you make that meal the ultimate thing, it doesn't work. But when you see it as a taste of something bigger to come, we can enjoy the simple moments. You know, dining is what God made humans for, right in the Garden of Eden. There were fruit trees, and He wanted them to enjoy the fruit as a gift from Him. Dining is what God told the Israelites to do on each Sabbath, every 7 days, to rest and to feast and to find enjoyment. And isn't dining what Jesus did throughout His ministry? We saw this in our series earlier in the year. Yes, it pointed to the future. He was always pointing to the future, and yet we saw how Jesus was eating and drinking His way throughout the Gospels. He was the happiest man alive, and He enjoyed the moments, each moment, in relationship with others. See, I think if the Christ was speaking to us today, he would say, well, yeah, I get it, COVID is outside of your control. It's part and parcel of this world with chaval and frustration. And so enjoy, though, those muffins. Enjoy a bike ride. Call a friend, watch a movie, read a novel, ring your parents, write a letter, play with your kids, cook a nice meal, feed the hungry, learn a language, laugh with some friends over Zoom until it makes you cry, listen to Mozart or perhaps even Justin Bieber. You know, enjoy the sun streaming down on your face or a good meal with the people you care about. Enjoy the simple things. You see, when my starting point is to stop controlling the things I largely can't control, I'm actually happy and free to enjoy the simple things in front of me as a gift from God. Now, my guess is that you have been waiting for this house of cards to fall, maybe wondering if I would make it fall at some point. You see, if I actually expect the house of cards to stand forever, I'm going to be disappointed when one day it actually does fall. But when I actually realize this house of cards is not permanent, it's not the ultimate thing, I can actually even find joy even when something doesn't work out the way I might think it should. This is the way life should work. The Christ would say to us, enjoy the moment. Enjoy the moment right in front of you, because there's only one thing you can control, and that's your attitude towards the present moment. Let's pray together.
Father, thank you that you're dealing with all the havel and the futility of this world and renewing people and places everywhere. Help us to release control of the things we can't control anyway, so that we can be fully present to enjoy the simple aspects of life as a gift from you. And as a creator, we pray that you would be at the very center of our lives. I pray right now for people who want that to be their experience, but they're not there yet. And friend, if that's you, maybe you've never made any step to follow Jesus, or maybe you're a Christian, but other things are taking that center stage. If so, would you just take a moment to pray with me? Jesus, today I want to follow you. Help me to do so. There's so much misplaced focus in my life. The pursuit continues to be futile and empty. So I turn my focus to you and I ask you to take lead in my life. Jesus, thank you that you gave your life so that I can find true life. So Father, on this Father's Day, we come to you and we thank you that you adopt even people like us into your family. You really are a good, good Father. In Jesus' name, amen.
I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Will you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before you are.